and welcome. Today I am going to make a really cool fun fold. This is a bay window card. So I'm starting off with my cardstock here cut to 4 1/4 by 11, and along that 11-inch edge I'm scoring at 3/8 of an inch, 1 3/4, 3 3/4, 5 1/8, and 5 1/2. So the easiest way I've found to do this is first score it in half, so you have your normal card base beside folding landscape. And then the very first fold is a valley fold, the next two are mountain folds, and the last fold is a valley fold. So now I'll just cut down some mats and layers. So I'm going to first cut this to 4 1/8. That's going to be the height. And then I'm just going to cut this strip. So I've got 1/4 of an inch. Basically, I'm cutting these pieces so that they are 1/8 of an inch smaller than the panel they are going to get attached on top of. So this is totally up to you. It just depends on how much of that card base you want showing. So if you want a little bit more of the white of your card base to show, then you can always cut these smaller. So I'm using Kalal all-purpose glue today because this pattern paper I'm using is actually paper. It's thin stuff. I got it mostly because it's just got a lot of really standard, easy to use patterns like polka dots, stripes, etc. So, and it's 12 by 12. So it's just nice to have as a bit of a staple, because there's lots of colors and it was really inexpensive. And I think it was mostly because the price just dropped suddenly on Amazon. You know how sometimes that happens? And I was lucky enough to spot it, and so I do use it when it's just, the perfect pattern and color for a project. But that does mean that a lot of times you do have to be a little bit careful about warping, especially if you like to use a liquid adhesive. You could always use a nice dry adhesive for this, but I knew I would want to have a little bit of wiggle room getting these onto their panels so that it has a nice even border all the way around. And I don't know, you probably may not recognize this, but this is actually a piece of a pattern paper that's left over from the first quarter sweet kit. Can you believe it? So this was from the, I think it was the calendar with the nomies. And so I used up most everything in that particular kit, but I did have just a couple of scraps left from that 12 by 12 pattern paper pack that we got. And so I'm using that here. And then I've just got a piece of solid color cardstock for my center of my bay window. And that's because I want a nice solid dark background for some contrast. And you'll see why in a bit. So this piece here I've cut to 1 inch wide by 4 1/4 tall. So it's the height of my card, and it's 1 inch wide. I'm attaching some foam pads to the back of this, and as you can see, I'm lining up the foam pads so that they are closer to one end, and that's going to be the end that I put on the outside edge of the inside of my card. So this is getting attached to the inside of my card. And the reason why I left a little bit of that the back of this so that there isn't any foam is so that this is actually going to serve as a bit of an easel stopper. And so I want the front of the card to have a nice place to tuck into. And then I'm going to glue down just this first section of the front of our card, that little narrow 3/8 of an inch. I just want to glue that down so that it is attached to the inside. And I've got this piece here that is just conveniently the right size. You saw a moment ago, I was just auditioning some of my leftover cuts. This one happened to be perfect. So it's ends up being 4¼ by 4¼ So it's fantastic, and it fills in the rest of the inside of the card with a little bit of pattern paper. And because this card is meant to be on display, with the bay window sort of coming out a little bit from the back inside of the card, some of this will be visible, but not a whole lot of it. So if you wanted to still write your message on the inside of the card, you could add maybe a white cardstock panel that's cut a little bit smaller and attach that on top of that pattern paper. And that way you have a place to, if you want to stamp a sentiment, or when you go to give the card, actually handwrite a little message. It gives you a nice place to do that. So I don't actually do that on camera here, but before I give out this card, I actually might go ahead and add that extra little panel. So this month's release is this adorable Build a Snowman, and you can build your snowman as a stamped image, or you can build him as die cuts, or both. You can stamp and then die cut. I decided to just die cut only, so I'm not using the stamp actually, and I've just used the coordinating dies to die cut out the various elements, which I think they hold their shape well enough. Even though they are the outline of a stamped image, I think they still hold their shape well enough so that you can actually tell what that is. So for example, the mouth here, it's got those little bumpies, but that's because if you look at the stamped image, it's actually a mouth that's made up of coal, or that's the impression. And so you could stamp and use that die to cut it out, but I think the die on its own actually stands up pretty well. And similarly, I've just used the carrot nose outline die. I think that still stands up on its own, the shape. Sometimes when you have coordinating dies, because they are larger, they might not have enough definition to where you can still make out what the original object is. But I feel like for these snowman elements, they hold up really well. So I wanted to add a little bit of holly leaves and berries to the hat, and I decided to just create them from my Nuvo drops. So I'm just drawing out my leaves. Okay, so my first one did not turn out so great, but that's why we do a practice. And the next two I think actually work out pretty well. And so this is a fun way to kind of use up your drops, because if you're like me, working your way through one of these bottles will probably take a good long time. And that's not to be suggesting that you be wasteful with them, but I like to just find more ways to use them so that I actually use the products up. I find it very satisfying when I actually use something completely up, like a paper pad or, a media product. So one thing that I wanted to add to my snowman was some branches to represent his arms. So I'm just going to hand cut those out of some of my brown cardstock here. And basically what I did was cut out a Y. Pretty simple. I didn't feel like it needed to get too much more intricate than just that. And so this is a rather thin layering, super lightweight cardstock. So what I'm gonna do is, again, I'm gonna use my Kalal all-purpose glue. It's not water-based. It's actually a solvent-based glue, so it doesn't absorb into your paper, which is why it won't wrinkle or warp your paper. But when it dries, it does dry rock hard and will add some extra strength and stability to these. So what I've done is I've just glued it down onto some more of that same brown cardstock, and then I'm just going to cut around. So essentially doubling up the thickness of my cardstock here so that these arms are a little bit sturdier. And that's going to be important because the arms aren't really going to get completely glued down. So they're just kind of going to hang in the air, which I think is kind of a nice look with this style of card, because you can have some elements actually extend beyond the center panel where the snowman is getting attached. And so he kind of looks like he's sort of popping out a little bit, and that just kind of adds a little bit more dimension to the whole project. This was a white core cardstock that I used, and so I wanted to just ink the edges as at least a little bit to take away some of that white. It's such a small little die cut. I didn't do a super great job of it, but I think it took away enough so that it's not super visible. And even though I used some liquid glue to glue those arms down, I did put just some plain old Scotch tape behind there just to make sure that gets held in place as I continue to kind of move my snowman around and work on this guy as I position him. And I did end up with a little bit of adhesive where I didn't want, so I used my gum eraser to just pull off some of that adhesive residue just to neaten things up a little bit. And then I'm going to use some foam to attach my snowman to. Now, when you put your glue down to glue anything to the center panel, you want to make sure that you're only gluing it to the center panel. Don't glue anything down to the two panels next to it, because then your bay window isn't going to sort of pop open the way that you would want. And so what's great about this card is that it folds down completely flat, and so will be a relatively easy shipper or mailer, but it is really nice to put on display because it's got that nice bay window shape. It stands up really well, and like I said, you could still put this on display even though some of the inside of the card will be visible. I think if you put your little extra white panel on the inside of the card, if you put it low enough, it's not going to be super visible. So I think somebody could even put this on display, like if it's a card for a coworker, they could put it on display and not have to worry about somebody walking by and reading the message on the inside. But check out the final card. My glue hasn't dried yet on that hat, but I thought the little holly leaves and berries turned out pretty well. I hope you enjoyed this card, and if you did, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. And until next time, happy crafting and have a fantastic day. Bye!